This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Between two-factor authentication, strong passwords, and a VPN, you try to be in control of how your info is protected. But many other places also have it, and they might not be as careful. That's why LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast for 40% off. Terms apply.
The NBA playoffs are here, and I'm getting my bets in on FanDuel. Talk to me, Chuck GPT. What do you know?
All sorts of interesting stuff, even Charles Barkley's greatest fear.
Hey, nobody needs to know that.
New customers bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets if you win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. 21 plus and present in Virginia. Must be first online real money wager. $5 deposit required. Bonus issued is non-withdrawable bonus bets that expires 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See full terms at FanDuel.com/sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
What's going on, Eagles fans? Welcome to our latest episode of the No Huddle Show, our Philadelphia Eagles podcast for NJ.com. This is Cayden Steele, and joining me as always will be my co-host, Bob Brookover. OTAs and minicamp has wrapped up, and you know what that means. The season's getting closer. Training camp is nearing with about 6 weeks remaining until the Eagles are back on the practice field. Today, we're going to examine what we're looking forward to the most. When we're out there in late July and early August, what do we want to see? It's going to be a lot of position battles. There's some coaching changes. We're going to discuss it all today. The episode is brought to you by Penco Tech, with 2 convenient campuses in Blackwood, New Jersey, and in Bristol, Pennsylvania. Penco Tech has provided comprehensive hands-on career training for more than 50 years, featuring programs in HVAC, electrical, plumbing, automotive technology, and more. With dedicated instructors and career placement assistants, Penco Tech can give you the skills and confidence to build a brighter future. Financial aid is available to those who qualify. Learn more and take the first step by going to pencotech.edu. Let's get right into it, Bob. The first position that I want to go over today may not be the one that people consider the biggest weakness in terms of starter, but at least in terms of depth, has me the most worried is edge rusher. Obviously, the Eagles lost Josh Sweat in free agency to the Cardinals. They were never going to be able to afford him. They drafted Hod Campbell in the first round, who figures to have some role as a pass rusher, maybe, depending on how comfortable Vic Fangio is with him in terms of that skill set. But you look at this edge rush room right now. Nolan Smith, Jalen Hunt as your projected starters. You like the upside, but there's still a lot of unproven ability there. I mean, Jalen Hunt had a really nice moment in the Super Bowl, played well down the stretch, but is only in his second year. Nolan Smith played really well in the playoffs and towards the end of last season, but this is his first time as a true number 1 pass rusher. And then you get into the depth. Ezekiel Jalari, a banged-up pass rusher who has talent, but hasn't been able to stay healthy. Josh Uche, who's in the middle of a crossroads in his career, hasn't been very good the last 2 years after breaking out in 2022. And then the rest of the room, I mean, Patrick Johnson, Antoine Powell-Ryland, there's not a lot there. I'm concerned. I think this could be the position that ends up hurting them the most this year. And it's the position I feel like they have to figure out during training camp, where they're at, whether they have to bring someone in or I'm worried about it heading into the summer. How are you feeling about this group overall?
Yeah, well, it's 2 things. One is, in addition to all those things, Nolan Smith, and the first time really a year ago at this time, he was like number 4 on the depth chart at that position. Now he's really number 1, the most experienced guy who's been around, longest tenure guys who continuously been around here. But also he's coming off the same injury that Brandon Graham had, the torn triceps, and he's recovering from that. So, in addition to all those things, you add that into the mix, and it makes it even more concerning. As you pointed out, Ojulari is, a guy who has ability, but has not had the ability to stay healthy. And then, the X factor here is what Jahad Campbell is going to be. But again, another guy that's injured. There's just so many questions. And, you have a rookie like Antoine Powell-Ryland. Great. He had 16 sacks and 25 and a half sacks, I think, the last 2 years. at Virginia Tech, and that's terrific. But still, there's just so much unknown there. The second part of this whole thing is it's kind of sexy to think about what they could do to boost the position. One being the Trey Hendrickson situation just keeps lingering on for Cincinnati. Now he didn't report to the mandatory minicamp. At least my last check, I haven't checked in the last few hours whether anything on there has anything changed.
Yeah, I don't think anything changed, and I am curious about the Trey Hendrickson thing because obviously it's been people have been talking about on Twitter, and I think it's a fun theory to add a player like that. But could they afford him if he were to get traded? Is that a guy they can afford with the Jalen Carter contract coming up? I mean, it would be nice to have him. Obviously, he's a top 5 pass rusher, top 6 pass rusher in the NFL, and he would completely transform the room because it would knock Jalen Hunt down to a really good rotational pass rusher. Then you would have your 1A, and then your 1B would be Nolan Smith. But is that? I wonder if that's a realistic option, even though it would be really fun.
Well, the other intriguing part about that to me is, we keep hearing about the Eagles' financial problems, and I don't know how much trust you can put in overthecap.com, but they're a well-respected website when it comes to figuring out cap space. And at the moment, they have the Eagles with the 7th most cap space. It was 6 earlier in the week, and the Packers' release of Jaire Alexander moved them up to 6 ahead of the Eagles. But they're still 7th ahead of every other team in their own division when it comes to cap space right now. So, I mean, if that's to be believed, then the answer is probably yes, that they can afford to do that. But again, they have other factors that worked in that don't show up on places like Over the Cap. The main one being Jalen Carter, they're going to have to back a truck up and unload it, Brinks truck, and unload it to sign him ahead of these things. But even if that's not your guy, to me, Zadarius Smith is a really intriguing option. He's saying he wants to get back to Detroit now, but he hasn't yet. And if the Eagles can figure out a way to get him on a 1-year deal, I mean, the Eagles are every bit as attractive as the Lions have to be for any free agent, still out there right now. And if they could get him back on the right, get him here on the right deal, he's a guy who had 9 sacks last year. That would have led the Eagles during the regular season. And he had 62, according to Pro Football Focus, he had 62 pressures, which I think would have been 3rd on the Eagles. So it's not like you're just bringing in some guy who's at the end of the road. He's not that. He got released by the Lions earlier this year because they obviously didn't want to pay him what he was getting before. And then the other guy who I do think is aging a little bit and slowing down is Von Miller, but has connections to Vic Fangio. I don't know how Vic feels about him. He hasn't been asked about him. But, there are some sexy things out there at the position that make it the most intriguing of the Eagles' question mark spots right now.
And you figure, I do agree with you that if they don't make a splash trade for like Trey Hendrickson, this is a position they have to add because I have confidence in maybe 2 of these guys. I think Nolan Smith, I have a ton of confidence in, and Jalen Hunt, I think sky's the limit. I think the potential. I mean, he's a former safety. The athletic traits. I mean, the way he performed in the Super Bowl, dominating at times in that game. You have to feel good about where he's going, but you wonder if he's more of a year 3 breakout than a year 2 breakout. I don't know what type of step he's going to take in year 2, but he did flash at that mini camp practice this week on Tuesday. But I wonder if they look around the trade market if it's not Trey Hendrickson. And I'm just throwing out a name. I've seen some speculation before the draft. Maybe this is a guy that could be available at some point. And then recently I read that he's in a contract year and they haven't really worked anything out. Is Odofa away from the Ravens? He's in the final year of his deal, had 10 sacks last year. And this is me just speculating. I don't know if the Ravens are actually really wanting to trade him, but they haven't agreed to a contract. He's available in the final year of his deal, and they're a contender, so it might take some to get him. Or another player of along those lines, a young pass rusher who may be on the final year of his deal, who's maybe not to the Trey Hendrickson level, but it's a guy that you think has upside to develop into more. Or if you can get a guy on a 1-year rental, a veteran that is getting shopped. I think this is a position that has to get upgraded because as talented as Azeez Ojulari is, I don't think you can rely on him being available more than 10, 11, 12 games. Like he hasn't proved it. He hasn't been healthy for a full season since his rookie year. And well, yeah, he's been productive. 8 sacks as a rookie. He had 6 sacks last year, despite missing a large chunk of time, and he was on pace for double-digit sacks. Josh Uche hasn't been good in years. If you don't add another guy, I worry about what this pass rush room looks like in December. Once you get outside of Jalen Hunt and Nolan Smith, do they have enough to get after the passer like they have in past years? And Bob, I think you brought up a good point. The ceiling of this room probably depends on how good Jahad Campbell is in that area if they use him. If he's really good in that area, then maybe you don't have to make a move.
Yeah, but I just don't think that can be found out. That can be found out in just training camp. We didn't see him at all on the field in OTAs. I just that's a big risk to take right now in my mind. But like I said, there are options out there that could make sense for the Eagles if they could do it. To me, I just keep coming back to Darius Smith. But another guy who still proved he had something left last year was Jadeveon Clowney with the Panthers. 4.5 sacks, but he had 44 pressures. We're talking about a guy, if you can trust Jalen. It depends on what level you want to go to. We're talking about adding a guy, if you really trust Jalen Hunt and Nolan Smith, that you just want to mix into the rotation, that you just if you can also go that route rather than go the superstar route. I think if you bring in somebody like Darius Smith, you end up making Jalen Hunt like a number 2. But like if you bring in a Von Miller or a Clowney or some guys along those lines, you can say, hey, we you almost treat it like a year ago at this time. The thought was Brandon Graham was going to be, your 3rd or 4th rotational rusher, and he played so well early on that Vic said, and that's not what you are. He was, let's not make any bones about this. Brandon Graham, when he got hurt last year, was the Eagles' number 2 pass rusher. He was number 2 in that rotation. And with Nolan Smith kind of very close behind at that point. But, it wasn't really the plan going into this season for it to be that way. So you bring in one of these guys and you say, hey, we're not going to ask you to, play the kind of snaps you did when you were younger, but we really need this from you. I just think I'll be surprised. I'll say that, Cayden, if we don't see somebody at it at that position before not necessarily before training camp, but before the start of the season. Because these things can linger on in training camp. A lot of times they don't even want these guys to come to training camp because only bad things can happen in training camp. You get hurt. The players don't want to really go to training camp, and the teams don't want them to get hurt in training camp. So if it happens late in training camp, I'd be surprised if we didn't see something before the start of the season.
Yeah, and it gives the Eagles time to evaluate this edge rush group. I mean, it's tough in minicamp and OTAs because obviously they're not wearing pads and they're not seeing what they can do at one-on-ones and stuff. But
that's a good point.
But of all those options you mentioned, Bob, I think the one that I'm most curious with, and I do believe the Eagles would be most interested if Vic really advocates for him, would be Von Miller, because he wouldn't take away from Jalen Hunt snaps. And they've talked about this youth movement, and we saw how Jalen Hunt played at the end of last season. I think they're very high on him. And this is a guy that wouldn't stunt his development, but he would be there as you said, that Brandon Graham type replacement. And if Azeez Ojulari can't stay healthy, at least you have a guy there as your 3rd pass rusher who still finished with 6 sacks last year. Obviously, he's not the player that he used to be, but I would feel good about Von Miller on a 1-year deal. You figure that.
No, I think Azeez can. If Azeez is healthy, I still think he can be a double-digit sack guy. I mean, he's he could end up being your number 2. I really do believe that. I talked to somebody who knows him very well and has followed his career very closely, and he reminded me of one thing that was really interesting and I kind of forgot about. Azeez is younger still than some guys that were just drafted. He's about to turn 25. He turns 25 next week, June 16th. So he's still only 25 years old. Been in the league 4 years already, going into his 5th year, but he's still only 25 years old going into the season. So I mean, there could still be upside for him with it all being based on can he stay healthy? You know, he hasn't been able to play more than 11 games the last 3 years. But you know, in those games, he's racked up what's the total there? 7, 13, 14 sacks and 29 games. So, you know, he's a guy who could end up being your number 2. I mean, if Alex regresses at all, or if the wear and tear of a long season that he didn't have to deal with last year becomes an issue at some point. So there's still stuff there. But again, if you're the Eagles and you want to have another shot at winning a Super Bowl, hey, you know what? Bring in whoever you can if you think they can help.
And the final point with the pass rushers before we move on to the rest of the competitions that we're looking forward to, even though Aziz is young and has been productive, are you worried that even though he's still been able to produce after being injured in past years, that these injuries are eventually going to catch up to him as he gets older? He's got a lot of wear and tear on his body. I read dating all the way back to high school before he went to Georgia, he had an ACL injury. So his body's been through just wear and tear. Like, at what point, even though he's young, does he, you know, regress or fall off because his body's just completely broken? And that would be my worry about him. Is it?
Yeah, I mean, you can have that worry about a lot of guys, though. I mean, Saquon had a lot of wear and tear on his body coming into last year, and didn't seem to bother him.
No,
So,
not at all.
I mean, the thing about those things to me is they're unpredictable.
Yeah.
You know, it's really unpredictable. You can have all the medical science you want, you know, but until you see it on the field and developing before your eyes, and maybe you can see it in OTAs. Some they can teams can certainly know like what speed a guy's running now compared to what speed he was running 4 years ago. But I mean, we don't know that. They know that, and you know, if they don't think that Aziz is or anybody is, that, you know, then they're gonna have to go make one of these moves.
Yeah, and I'm curious a little bit about Josh Uche because Lane Johnson brought him up as the first guy that he thought of when he was asked about what pass rusher is standing out. Zach Bond talked about how Josh Uche has been kind of like in his ear because he's been inspired by his journey. He hasn't been good in 2 years, but at his height in 2022, he looked like one of the league's most promising pass rushers. It's a small sample size for him because that was really the only year he's played like that. But you wonder with Vic, is he a bounce back candidate as well in this pass rush room? But
well, you know, going back, and it's not so much these days, but this is going back into the 70s, 60s, and 70s. People used to talk about how, you know, guy didn't look so good like in a 76ers jersey or a Phillies jersey, but then they put on a Celtics or a Yankees jersey, and it didn't look like the same player anymore. And there's something to be said for, you know, guys going, you know, going to a new place. And the Eagles are one of those teams now where, you know, you find out that because of coaching, because of just atmosphere, culture, that these guys realize, you know, especially if they're, you know, reached, as you put it earlier, crossroads in their career, you know, it just ends up being the right place and the right fit. Zach Bond's obviously the perfect example of that last year. And, you know, it does happen in these places because the culture is so good. We'll see. It's what makes training camp fun. It's what makes the season fun.
maybe they'll have that type of guy this year, their next Zach Bond, or maybe their next Mekhi Becton. That's where we'll go next with this offensive guard position. Tyler Steen, all 3 practices that have been open to the media, the 2 OTAs practice, the 1 minicamp practice, has been taking all the reps with the first team. I don't know what that will mean come training camp time, but it seems like he's the favorite for that position. But then you have Kenyon Green, who could be that reclamation project. The offensive guard from the Houston Texans that the Eagles acquired for C.J. Gardner-Johnson has not been a good player in his NFL career after getting drafted in the first round of the 2022 NFL draft, has dealt with injuries, but mainly he's just played really poorly when he has been available. You also have Matt Pryor a guy that Bob, what surprised me in doing my research before this podcast is how well he played as a starter for Chicago last year. He has a high PFF grade. He was consistent throughout the season. Maybe he's the insurance option if Tyler Steen completely trips over his own ankles and is terrible in training camp. You have Matt Pryor, who played with the Eagles for 2 years, the former 6th-round pick in 2019, so he knows Jeff Stoutland. This right guard position, another one where I'm concerned, maybe a little bit less because I know they have Lane Johnson on the right side and playing next to Cam Jurgens as well. Maybe that guy can just be average, but this is a position where I don't feel great about either.
Yeah, I mean, the thing to remember is that who was the leading candidate going into training camp, leaving OTAs and going into training camp last year to be the right guard? Mm-hmm. It was Tyler Steen, and he's got to prove it again. And the interesting thing you brought up Matt Pryor, and I had looked up all those PFF numbers. When they acquired him, because I thought it was interesting, and this is just watching the OTAs and watching the guys like Lane Johnson and Jordan Mailata. They know him and seem to have some trust in him, and you can see them really talking to him a lot, and so there's some familiarity there. That to me, he's number 2 right now, not Kenyon Green, at the position. Kenyon wasn't really even running a lot at right guard in these OTAs. I don't remember seeing him run once there. Did you? You did 2 of the. I wasn't at one of the OTAs, and you were at that one. And you also were paying closer attention to this one because you did the practice report. Did he run Wednesday at all? Tuesday at all? At right guard?
I don't think he was at right guard.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I did look a little bit, and when I was looking, he wasn't. So, but it's up in the air for sure. And I do find Matt Pryor as being the most intriguing guy on there. I thought maybe Keegan would get more of a shot. And he was running some, and maybe he will when we get more into training camp. Pick from last year, but that even though Tyler Steen was the guy running all the time in OTAs, he was a year ago too. Although a year ago, what happened, which opened the door some in OTAs, I think, is Landon Dickerson wasn't running a lot in OTAs last year. And they were running Becton at left guard during the OTAs. And then when they got into training camp, they were splitting right guard. And then Tyler Steen got hurt pretty early on in training camp. That opened the door for Mekhi Becton, and he rode it all the way to a Super Bowl title and a new big deal. So good for him. He's now with the Chargers. But so given all those things, I would say that position is very much up for grabs. It's really the only one on the offense that's up for grabs right now. So we'll see how that plays out.
Just going over some of the notes that I took during the other practice on Tuesday and throughout, it looks like Kenyon Green's been mainly running at left guard. So I think we are correct on that, which maybe to them, he's just a pure, reclamation project. No expectations. Like I don't feel like Kenyon Green is a roster lock. Like his contract's not too expensive. He's on a rookie deal. Like if he plays poorly in training camp and he shows up and he's the opposite of Mekhi Becton, where he doesn't take it seriously and it doesn't seem like. And I'm not saying this is going to happen, but to me, he's not a guy that I think they have a ton of expectations for. Maybe he ends up surprising, but how many guys end up being Mekhi Becton? Plus, also Mekhi Becton, at least when he was a rookie, looked like a really promising NFL tackle. And then he had the 2 knee injuries, the weight issues, everything kind of spiraled there in New York. But at one point, you saw him flash as a really good starting NFL tackle. Kenyon Green hasn't been good since college.
Well, he's also in his NFL days, he's never played a single snap anywhere but left guard.
Yeah, so lack of versatility. I just don't know. it would be a great story, and it would be fun for us to cover another guy who turns around their career in Philly. I have my doubts about Kenyon Green, but Matt Pryor, yeah, a legitimate shot, and that would be disappointing, I think, for the Eagles and for Tyler Steen if he doesn't win that job. It would be year 3, and at that point, I think you would have to kind of chalk it up as Tyler Steen's a backup in the NFL. We missed on the pick. 3 years, 2 years in a row, he hasn't been able to win the starting job. I know last year is a little more difficult when Mekhi Becton played the way he did, but this is a big moment for Tyler Steen.
You'd have to remember if Matt Pryor wins the job, then that means they had a successful 6th-round pick in the 2018 draft.
Yeah,
really, it's another way to look at it.
Full circle. He played the best year of his career. I mean, his highest PFF grades besides the year before the Niners, but he barely played any snaps. So he played a high percentage of snaps, graded out really well. Maybe he ends up having the best years ahead of him later in his career, which you don't always see, but he seemed to be serviceable. I know in his 2 years in Philly, he had his ups and downs, but he was a young player then. So
he was moving around a lot then too. I mean, he played tackle his first year, guard, second year, tackle his third year, both his 4th year in Indy. So he moved around a lot. So maybe he's found a home at that position. We'll see. I do like that battle going into camp. I really do.
yeah, I do. I think it's the one to me of all the battles. I feel like that's the one that's the most wide open. Uh, I really do believe that. I just have the least confidence in Tyler Steen at that position. But let's go into the next battle. Let's go safety. Let's go Sidney Brown versus Drew Makuba versus, as Vic Fangio claims, Tristan McCullum, but I'm skeptical of that. But that safety battle there, how are we feeling going into training camp after OTAs and minicamp? What we saw of those guys?
Yeah, I'm inclined. Well, there's another element to this too that we probably need to discuss. Does Cooper DeJean get his extra snaps at safety or cornerback? To me, from what I've watched during OTAs, but again, we'll see when we get to training camp, was that Cooper's, when he's not running in the slot, will be running outside. But, both him and Vic brought the possibility of him playing safety up. So, that part exists too. So there's really 4 parts to this whole thing. I'd love to see Sidney Brown win this thing because of what he's been through as a player. But I'm guessing that Drew Makuba is probably the leader right now in that fight. But we'll see when we get to training camp, because the thing for safeties is they have to be able to tackle. It's just very important. I think Sidney's a very good tackler. The reports on Drew are that he's a good tackler and was a good tackler in college, but it's a good fight. I know it's nice, and the interesting thing, Vic isn't just giving lip service when he throws Tristan McCollum into that mix, because Tristan really was ahead of Sidney on the depth chart last year whenever they need, wasn't very often, but whenever they needed that extra safety, it was Tristan and not Sidney going in there. Now, Sidney was coming off an injury last year, pretty gruesome injury that kept him from starting the season, kept him from going through training camp. So, Vic gave a very interesting answer to. I'd asked the question: does Sidney have any advantage because it's his 3rd year in the NFL, where Drew's a rookie? And he basically said no, because he missed all of last season. Was the abbreviated, the abridged version of his answer was, no, not really. So I would say Drew's the favorite right now, and with Sidney number 2 and Tristan number 3 on that list. But again, his other answer, and my simple question was to Vic was, how do you view that competition? And he said it's a competition that's not going to be decided until deep into training camp. So we'll see.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one, though. They've been splitting reps throughout the spring, both getting their fair share of first team reps. But to me, if you're drafting Drew Makuba in the second round, and that's a premium pick, I think it reflects a little bit the confidence that they have in Sidney Brown. And that doesn't mean Sidney Brown can't come in and have a great training camp and transform his career and become a vital piece to their secondary. But I don't think they draft Drew Makuba if they have a ton of trust in Sidney Brown being a full-time starter. Maybe he finds his footing if he doesn't become a starter as a key special team player in that third safety if they're not using DeJean as much, on some of those snaps. Tristan McCullum, uh, he made that huge play against the Ravens last year. I know he struggled against the start against the Panthers, but he's been a really quality special teams player. And I think for him, it's at least good news. If Vic's bringing up your name, you feel good about your chances of making the roster. Like, I don't think he's getting pushed off by guys like Andre Sam and Louis Simon when training camp comes around. Tristan McCullum has worked his way on the roster. He's an important player for Michael Clay, and good for him going forward. Let's move to the other part of the secondary, the cornerback room, where we have a competition with Keely Ringo and Adoree Jackson. Keely Ringo, third year in the league, but he's still 22 years old. He's 6'2", 207 pounds. He ran a 4.36 40-yard dash a couple years ago during his pre-draft process. Hasn't played a ton in the NFL on defense, but he's been an ace as a gunner. He's been an incredible special teams player, has all the physical tools, like I already mentioned. Then Adoree Jackson, the veteran. He's been a productive NFL player, but towards the back end of his career. How do we see this competition playing out in training camp between two different players at two different stages in their career?
This is an interesting one to me more so than the safety, because the winner of this competition, is probably going to be on the field a lot because, as Vic pointed out during OTAs, the Eagles are not in their base defense very often, which means Cooper is in the slot most of the time, which also means that whoever is on the outside opposite Quinyon Mitchell, who, by the way, is moved from the right side last year mostly to the left side where Slay used to be. But whoever is not, whenever Cooper's in the slot, this player is going to be on the island on the outside, although the Eagles plays a lot of zone. Ringo is definitely the guy they want to win this job. Although it was interesting, we both observed this the other day. We talked about it when we were coming off the field about how Ringo had made some plays during that, and he did. But some of them were coming, like he was out there with the second team D, and I think even a couple times with the third team D, whatever that means, because when you get to the third team, you got a mixture of a bunch of different guys. But I think that was just him wanting more reps, as many reps as possible, and them wanting him to get as many reps as possible. But he was making plays and he was closing fast, and he looked really good. Adoree is a good player. I mean, I covered Adoree in what was his best year with the Giants, and maybe one of his best games ever in the NFL came during the Giants playoff game in 2022. And when they held, I think it was like 6 catches and 47 yards. They held Justin Jefferson and a Giants win in Minnesota. It was a great game, and he played really, really well for them that year. Although he was hurt a little bit, and then he came back for the postseason. Played huge in that game. He's a great guy to have on the roster. I think he's a really good locker room guy. I find it interesting that several people have mentioned him as just being really positive influence in that locker room. It's interesting. The other interesting thing to me as a guy who covered the Giants, it seems like since I left the Giants and covered the Eagles, that all the Giants do is send players to the Eagles who end up playing well for them. Last year it was obviously Saquon. A few years before that, it was James Bradbury. Could Adoree Jackson be that next guy? I don't know. We'll see. But my view of the situation right now is Keely's ahead of Adoree on the depth chart, but Adoree is certainly a hell of an insurance policy to have if they need him.
Yeah, Tuesday's practice, Keely breaks up the fade in the left corner of the end zone to Terrace Marshall. Never panicked. It wasn't a great ball. but did a good job. He broke up a slant on Danny Gray. He was all over the field on Tuesday, and yes, it is minicamp, but you're seeing him move a little more fluid. And I think the thing that stood out to me the most from his press conference when we talked to him the previous week was just about the technique. Because when you look at Keely Ringo, he has all the physical tools that you want: height, weight, speed. I mean, this is a guy that when he was coming out, and they ended up being wrong, but draft analysts thought he was like a late first, early second round type player. He fell all the way to the fourth round. The Eagles liked him so much they traded a future third to go get him. So they've had this plan um, to develop him, and now it's year 3. He works with Christian Parker, which gives me more confidence. Last season, behind the scenes, he didn't have to play much, but Christian Parker is one of the fastest, rising coaches in the NFL. Wouldn't be surprised if he's a DC in a couple of years. So working with him on his technique, he talked about learning how to transition, his weight, and his speed at the same time. And the biggest knock on him coming out of college was, yes, he's super fast. He ran the 4.36, but he doesn't flip his hips extraordinarily well. To me, he didn't have a problem getting out in and out of his breaks and transitioning in practice. That's a guy that has one of the highest ceilings in terms of physical ability, probably on the entire roster. Will he reach up? Will he live up to it? Who knows? I mean, it depends on a lot of things, but you have to feel good about him as a breakout candidate. Jalen Hunt maybe as a breakout candidate. There's a lot of exciting players on this defense. And then Adoree Jackson, I agree with you, Bob. Not a bad player to have as your top backup potentially. He's played a lot of football. You have to feel good about having that veteran presence in there. I feel better and better about his chances of making this roster compared to I did when they first signed him. So I'm excited to see this cornerback competition. But now we're going to move on to our last subject of the day, and probably the most important thing of the entire season, probably the most important thing to watch in training camp, even though it might be tough to kind of take things out of it because it's going to be limited things that they show on offense, is Kevin Patullo. He talked last week with reporters. First year as an OC, a lot of the players are saying, not much is changing, just the terminology. That's the only thing that's really going to be different. You have to learn his terminology. He's going to sprinkle in some new ideas here and there. Nick Sirianni's giving him credit for that, kind of taking command of the room. What is our expectations for Kevin Patullo early on in the summer?
There's a ton of talent. So, and the familiarity is important, but it didn't mean much for Brian Johnson a couple years ago. Although I will say this, let's remember that the Eagles' offense in 2023 still finished 7th in the league in points, 8th in yards. They had some issues down the stretch, but they also had some injuries down the stretch. If you remember, A.J. Brown didn't play, got hurt in the Giants last game, didn't play in the playoff game. So they had some serious issues there, but they were still putting up a ton of points in that 2023 season. Brian Johnson, to me, kind of became a scapegoat, maybe that didn't need to become a scapegoat. But the Eagles decided they needed to move on from Brian Johnson. But again, so they were the 7th in scoring, 8th in yards in 2023, and the identical numbers, 7th and 8th in 2024. I think the Eagles' offense has reached a point where it needs to ascend beyond there, and I think it can. And that's where Kevin Patullo comes in. Can he bring some new ideas? I think a lot of things have happened here. I think Brian Johnson was also, when he was the OC, was also dealing with at a time when it wasn't that where Jalen Hurts' relationship with Nick Sirianni wasn't always in sync, where Jalen wasn't really that keen about just having to keep switch coordinators. He wasn't looking at it and always looking at it in a positive light. He just flat out said, I'm sometimes jealous of our offensive linemen for having Stoutland their whole careers, always to lean on. And Jalen has changed that tune. And Jalen also has a relationship with Patullo. I thought what Saquon said about Patullo the other day when he was asking about, they're going to do some different things to try to shut down this offense. And he started his answer by saying, well, I have a lot of confidence in Kevin Patullo as a great coach. You don't say that if you don't mean it, because you don't have to say it. So I think they're going to be fine in that respect. Certainly in the transition part of it, the challenge for Kevin Patullo, can you call the right plays at the right time and see the right things? Kellen Moore, obviously, his genius last year, and it was the genius of the whole franchise, and you can give credit to whoever you want, was at a certain point they said, we have this weapon in Saquon Barkley, and this offensive line, let's use it and abuse the other team, and they did. And then when it came time in the Super Bowl where the Chiefs sold out on stopping that weapon, Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown and Dallas Goedert and Jahan Dotson and Devontae Smith, they were the answer. They couldn't stop them. And, a lot of that too had to do with the defense that, the Eagles were so good at taking the ball away that meant that the Eagles often had the ball in advantageous situations. But I'm not as concerned about Kevin Patullo as maybe people were Brian Johnson. I wasn't there for the start of that. I was still covering the Giants at the time. I'm not as concerned about that transition because I just think the maturity and where Jalen Hurts is at now as a quarterback, and the fact that Saquon Barkley is also part of this offense now, and that they brought Dallas Goedert back to be part of the weaponry and the offensive line, still pretty much intact except for the right guard spot. I'm not that concerned about it. I'm really not. I don't necessarily agree with you that that's the biggest thing to watch for here. I would put edge rusher, the thing we started with, at number one on my list. But I think the transition is going to be fine just because the guy Patullo's been here. He knows what all the players are about. They seem to have a lot of respect for him. So that's not a big concern to me.
You might have talked me into it. I feel a little more confident after what you just said because you're right.
That was my junior year of college coursing, persuasion and influence coming through there, which I don't know even if I had a course called that, but I did have something like that. But I think I got a D in it. But
Well, you got an A on that one because your points are valid. I mean, he's been here since the start with Nick. He has the connection with the players. But this is also a high pressure job. I mean, you mentioned Brian Johnson getting scapegoated. This offense doesn't do well. I mean, Kevin Patullo is going to be the first one that gets blamed. Curious to see how he responds to everything. But the continuity does help that you have every starter returning on offense besides Mekhi Becton. You figure Devontae Smith's going to continue to get better. I still think Saquon. I know the workload was crazy last year, and you worry about maybe a regression there. But Saquon Barkley is a different type of athlete. I think if anyone can go have another spectacular season, maybe not 2,000 yards again, but close to it, it's Saquon Barkley. So obviously defenses are going to try to adjust their game plans, and they're going to try to slow down Saquon Barkley. But like you mentioned, Bob, Kansas City tried it, and the Eagles showed in most critical moments that they can get their passing game going. Now, can they do it consistently through 17 weeks if they have to? If the running game's not as effective, we'll see. But I think you can have some confidence in that. And I'm curious about Parks Frazier and Scott Loeffler as well. I mean, Parks Frazier was with Nick Sirianni in Indy. Then he went to Carolina with Frank Reich, and then that whole mess happened in Carolina. Then he went to Miami last year, so he was able to get away from the Sirianni Reich tree. He was able to learn from that Shanahan tree. You wonder what new ideas he brings in. And then Scott Loeffler, who's got a long resume of developing quarterbacks in college. He's close friends with Tom Brady, worked with Tom Brady, coached Tom Brady. And then He had only one run in the NFL and the worst luck ever in 2008 with the Detroit Lions when they went 0-16. So gets another NFL opportunity. I'm curious how he takes Jalen Hurts' game to the next level and how they, give new ideas to Kevin Patula and how everything meshes. But going before we end today, I guess, Bob, is there any other things that you're curious about after this OTAs and minicamp that stand out to you?
I just want to point out the Lions. The Lions played a lot of close games that 0-16 years. It was a rough year. They could have won some of those games. And I'm serious. they went 0-16 and they stunk. Never mind.
I like that you're trying to give him some credit. I guess the only thing I could think of, and Scott Leffler's the QB's coach for Dan Orlovsky, is the Dan Orlovsky running out of the end zone against the Vikings is the only memory as an 8-year-old that I have from that Lions season, because it's been clipped a million times for the last 15, 16 years of Dan Orlovsky making that mistake.
Right. Anyway, where were we? What was our topic? It took me off track here. Anything else? Just I think just period how difficult it is to win back-to-back Super Bowls. The Eagles are going to have to. They're going to get a team's best every week. We're going to see it. But I do think this team is equipped to repeat as champions. Whether they do it or not, I don't know. But I also do think they're in a better place than they were after the 2022 season. Just because they lost both their offensive and defensive coordinator that year. This time they only lost their offensive coordinator, and he'd only been there 1 year. And Nick just seems to have a better command of that room and a better command of what he wants, and just in a better place with Jalen and all his players. He really seems like he's found his footing as a head coach, and that's really important going forward. So, I don't have a whole lot of concerns beyond the positions that need to be replaced there, but from what I saw in OTAs, this is a team that's hungry to be successful again, and I'll be surprised. I'll be surprised if they're not.
Yeah, and just adding one more thing to it, I've been impressed with the way Nick Sirianni has handled his messaging. It's not been about focus on repeating. It's more been about focus on the day-to-day, what got them there. I think they're very focused on the present and not this attempt of repeating, which is good, because I think they're not putting that pressure on them. I think they're refocusing on the current season, and every player seems to be, like you said, hungry, but also focused on the present and not really worried about the past or trying to do the same thing they did last year. Nick Sirianni's talked about spending this offseason calling different coaches that successful coaches that have won multiple championships about the keys to having sustained success, as he's called it and other players have called it. So curious to see how this goes. Thank you for everyone tuning in today. We'll be back around training camp right before, probably with another episode, with another little preview, with getting a little more specific about some of the things that we're going to watch this summer in late July and early August that's going to make a difference. But thanks for everyone for tuning in. As always, check out our content on NJ.com, and we'll see you next time.